Alright, I think our volume's working just fine. If it gets cringy, I don't listen to the volume except for like after the stream is done, so let me know. But hello! Hi, Pixie Lord, welcome back. Today, for class, we have a doozy. This is one I've not particularly thought about, were the basics of fight scenes. So I really kind of had like an epiphany moment that I was like, oh, well, I've been asked to like, how do you write fight scenes? And I've never really thought about it. So I did the breaking down as much as I could. So this is all in my own words and my terms. So if you see these anywhere else, then either they copied me or I got really good at guessing. But for once again, everyone, welcome. This will be Creative Writing 101 Part 6. This is a class. But things on the screen so far. Hold on. See if I can do some quick techno support for other people. Alright. Sorry, I'm taking a quick second to make sure that this is all working. Okay, beautiful. If it's working, then we're golden. Alright. Welcome back, Pixie Lord. Anyone who can show up, I'll help out. um, so today we'll be doing Creative Writing 101, Part 6. The topics I have come up for today are effective reading, fight scene basics, and then an example in a damsel in distress format. And we'll talk about that more when we get to it, but we'll take up the majority of our stream when we get to it. That's not to say that we're going to slack on anything else, but once again, the fight scene basics will be basics from my point of view, what I think are important, and what I think especially will help out new authors thinking about how to write. So what we're going to cover. First of all, as always, in case this is your first stream and you're just coming in, we're going to cover who I am and why you should care. We're going to do a recap of the last class, and then we're going to talk about effective reading, some examples of applying it, fight scene basics. We're going to talk about the damsel in distress formula, and then we're going to go over application in story format. Since this is a creative writing class, we're going to go over some creative writing, and of course, it's got to be mine. That way, we don't get copywritten on it or anything like that. I don't have to look at any laws. And we can go over more specific examples. And we don't get torn apart when we're like, okay, now this could be better here and there and this and that. Because it's mine, we're not tearing apart Token or anything that's much beloved. So, all right, who I am and why you should care. My name is Captain Nathaniel Wilhelm, and I started out as a writer on Wattpad, and have gone over a couple platforms, including Tapas, Patreon, and well, that's it for now. Wattpad, Tapas, and Patreon are my main hubs for where I'm posting or have my works. I do have a total of 5 canon stories. Those are 5 of my stories that are fully fleshed out, finished being written, or almost done, or in the works. 3 of them are finished. One of them is I'm on hiatus on, and then the 5th one is the one that I'm currently posting, and that is True Love 7th Kiss. Across these 5 works, I have over 1 million words of published material posted, and that is just those. So those are my qualifications. I have been to school for creative writing and all that jazz. I just don't have a degree to show for it. But I'm not one to say that degrees prove it, because technically the master's degree program was calculated that after you'd been in class for 10,000 hours, they would give you a master's degree certificate. Something like that. But essentially, all of your credit hours added up to 10,000 hours for that specific subject. And it went back to the old adage, if you are 10,000 hours in anything will make you an expert in it. Which, I don't know if it'll make you an expert, but it'll make you really darn good. And I definitely have my 10,000 hours in writing, in research and writing, in the study of other works, and especially in the study of English and writing itself. And then, if you don't care about any of that, if I've discredited myself enough by opening my big mouth, in the very least, I can share my experiences as a writer with ADHD and how I've written 5 canon works with over 1,000,000 words. So, the Battle of Five Armies in the books was such a great fight, so vivid. I agree. So, a recap on what we did last week. We are going to, knowing your audience. Knowing your audience is very important because it lets you work on the genre you're working on. It also helps you focus your attention to what the reader needs to know. Because if you can nail down who your audience is, you'll know what to include and what to not include. If, for example, if your audience is male audience, especially teenage boys, you're more likely to have fun adventures, short sentences, big fight scenes, and stuff like that. And vice versa, if your audience is octogenarians, octogenarian women, maybe you'll write a steamy romance with lots and lots of dialogue and lots of steamy content. But if you're writing for like a textbook, you wouldn't include steamy content. And if you're writing for teenage boys, you wouldn't include like excess description on exports and imports of things that don't apply to your main character. Not that I think you should ever. But also getting, like, if it's a mystery or if it's an action novel, if it's an adventure, those things can help you narrow down how to write and what to write, especially when it comes to formatting. Formatting, essentially, it comes down to, for the most simple amount of formatting for new writers that need help with it, comes down to paragraphs and spacing. Get your paragraphs down and figure it out. Of course, web novel formats will be different than novel formats, which will be different than periodicals, which will be different than poems, which will be different from textbooks. Like, you got to know what formatting you're going for, and you got to get your paragraphs and your context down. Pacing, we went over pacing. Essentially, it was, oh my gosh, it was weeks ago, and I didn't look over this. Pacing. Essentially keeping up with story beats, and then prologues versus the first chapter, what is important in a prologue versus what is a chapter which will continue on in the story, and we set up some definites and do's and don'ts there, as well as some advice. And then editing, we gave some hot tips on how to start editing your works and what's important, and more importantly, the takeaway with all this is, like, put all your effort into getting it written down, and then technically all this stuff can come later when you're thinking about posting and when you're thinking about finalizing and polishing your work. If you're gonna post as you go, which I don't recommend, but I do, I would at least get formatting down. Pacing can come down back in the back end, and then I would say your prologues don't get hung up on your first chapter being exactly as it is. Let yourself write the first chapter and then come back later and make changes as needed without getting hung up on everything that happens in it. And then editing, of course, will be polishing off your story and include all of this, but More in-depth editing will happen over a longer period of time. As always, a healthy reminder that writing is a skill. Never stop writing. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Um, as funny as it sounds to think that you have writing muscles, you do have synapses in your brain that form better the more effort you put into things. Just like your muscles, just like other skills, just like learning a language. The more you do it, the better you get. And so I'm here to give you tips on how to do it the best possible and to give you a solid foundation um, on how to go. Lucius, do you even write, bro? Exactly. Pump it up. But yeah, keep writing. Keep the grind. Drink those protein drinks. Whatever you gotta do to keep yourself writing, but do it. Thank you for joining us, Lucius. For our first topic for today is effective reading. Just like sports teams look at their rivals, predecessors, and mentors for guidance, so do writers. Don't get hung up on the idea that you have to do everything unique and your own way. Allow yourself to emulate and imitate other authors until you get your own style. Not everything has to be avant-garde out of the gate, and for those that were truly avant-garde were those that uh, who were masters of the field and knew how to break the rules because they were very familiar with the rules. So, um, effective reading versus normal reading. Of course, normal reading is you just kind of read for the sheer entertainment value. And most of us do it this way, and there's nothing wrong with it this way. Most of us should be entertained by things that we read, or at least get something out of it. But if you are a writer, you need to start working on effective reading, because there'll be a lot of cool things and tips and ideas and concepts that you really like, but you will never be able to apply if you don't look for it or recognize it while you're reading. So, the first thing you gotta do while effective reading is just straight up read what you enjoy. Like, there's no reason you have to go out of your way to read any kind of the classics or anything that's boring or painful. You can if you really want to, but start with something you enjoy. And then narrow down what you like about it, what are the concepts you like about it, and then break it down even more. And once you have those elements broken down, you'll want to experiment. And when you experiment, you'll get all of those. Is where you'll find yourself like straight up almost plagiarizing, but because you're doing it your own way with your own characters, it shouldn't come that close. But it's a good place to trial and error, and then once you trial and once you error, you will rinse and repeat, and then I have some examples to show. So, first of all, of course, read what you enjoy. There's nothing wrong with reading for pure bliss. But if you're a writer, you're going to want to be an effective reader, so take notes. Whatever notes you got to take it your own way. If you can memorize something on the page and remember it for later, that's good enough. No, you don't have to have like a spare sheet of paper and a notebook next to you while you're reading a book or reading a web novel or anything for fun. But I will say that if you try, you will get some important information down. What I do is I'll take screen grabs or pictures of it or write it down in. I have a note app on my phone where I'll just put a bunch of notes. It's not very good, but I've used it for so long I can't get rid of it. But yeah, so first of all, read what you enjoy and take mental notes, take physical notes, take electronic notes. Take notes any way you can, but start experimenting with taking notes. And what you'll take notes on is what you liked about it. What do you really like about it? What keeps you reading? And what makes it better than like a dull, like classic novel where it's talking in old-timey language and you just can't grasp what's going on? Um, Ask yourself important questions like, do I like this story for its characters? Do I like it for its descriptions? Do I like it for the compelling scenes, the magic and wonder, the dynamics between characters and events? Do I like it because they got cool magic? Do I like it because I like safe storylines, and I'm just reading another isekai, another cultivation novel, and I just want another trashy novel where they just go in and every other scene is you're courting death and slapping and beating people up in every other chapter to save the girl, and there's 7 million girls by chapter 20. Like, narrow down what you like about it. Take notes on it that way. And then, once you've taken those notes down, you want to break those down into their fundamental elements. Break it down to an easy phrase if you have to. Do some real critical thinking, like, if you liked Lord of the Rings, like, what did you like about Lord of the Rings? Did you like the big epic battles? Did you like the relationship and development between Samwise Gamgee and Frodo? Did you like the whole world building with orcs versus humans and elves and all that and dwarves? Is it so bad that it goes right back to being good? Yeah. And then you're gonna start narrowing down even further. Um, Go to those scenes, go to those events, and then start breaking down the scenes and events that you liked. What really made this fight scene like really satisfying? What made this character dynamic really engaging? What made this world so fantastic and like that I wanted to immerse myself in it? And figure out what makes them interesting and then start making your own formulas on how to emulate that. Um, some of these formulas can be broken down to very, very common modern tropes, which is just how I kind of think about them, or what have you. Count Lord of the Rings would be Council of Heroes goes on adventure. Uh, the Hobbit would be old man gets shanghaied into going on a quest. um, it could be in your own words. It doesn't have to be my words. It doesn't have to be on tropes.com or whatever like that. But you want to break it down into elements that work for you and your writing style. And that's where the critical thinking comes along. And so once you've got that critical thinking down, you're going to experiment. You're going to emulate that. You're going to make it your own way. Nothing comes from unused knowledge, so practice what you know. So just get into it. Have fun with it. That's part of the fun of writing, is finding new tools to write with it. Is experimenting. Writing the stories you want to write. And you're already doing a little bit of this. Um, those that want to write isekai novels usually really enjoy isekai novels. Those that enjoy stories about orcs and elves and dwarves and humans and hobbits usually really enjoy those aspects. People that enjoy stories about witches and wizards and ghosts and goblins and horror stories usually are emulating and trial and erroring their hand at what they think was good about that and then trying putting their own spin on that. All I'm saying is to do that, but to do it a little bit more formulaically. Do it a little bit more. Do it while you're consuming content. Like, get ideas while you're consuming content. Don't let that time go to waste. Because part of that fun is testing yourself and learning from your mistakes, putting your characters into those adventures. Writing fan fictions is a great like example of this. It's like people who write fan fictions take all sorts of notes on the worlds they're trying to emulate because they got to put their characters in that world, and their characters have to abide by those rules. And as weird as it sounds, like it's a great place to start because when you start trying to write a fan fiction, if you want to, people who really want to be true to the world and the characters really do all this analyzing. Like, what makes these characters great? Why do I want my characters in this world, and what roles do I want them to fill in this world? What are the rules of this world? What do I have to subscribe to? How do these characters have to act in accordance with the characters that are already in the world? These build up skills that you'll use to take it elsewhere. And then once you've applied this, like, you shouldn't write fan fictions forever, but if that's what you really want to do it. But it's a great place to start and just keep going. Um, Rinse and repeat. You'll do these little tiny formulas over and over again to the point that you won't even realize you're doing it. So read and take notes on things you can apply, or at least if you're not taking active notes, at least remember the concepts so you can come back to them later. And then remember that as a writer, Your goal is never to write the perfect story, the perfect book that's going to sell out everywhere. Because if you're looking to judge a book on its perfection based on the amount of copies it sells, then you have to take a hard and fast look at the market. And you have to realize that the Bible is the number one selling book of all time. Now, does that make it the most perfect narrative of all time? Well, that conversation is very divisive. You're going to get a lot of yeses and a lot of nos. But the fact that there are yeses and nos means that, like, it's not for everyone. The concept of one book for everyone does not exist. That's why you got to know your audience, and write towards that audience. So your goal is not perfection, but continuous growth. Be better in this chapter than you were the last chapter. Write a better story like the next time after you finish the story. Like, you want to add as many skills to your arsenal and polish as many skills as you can. And once you have those skills and you've polished them, that's when your real writing style starts to come out. Hold on, I'm gonna get a drink. I've already talked too much. Now I'm dehydrated. Alright. So, an example of what I liked and how I adapted it. Back in the day, I was reading a lot of. I was reading a lot of harem manga and watching a lot of harem anime, and I was getting really tired at a certain point, a little fatigued of the same concepts and the same, like, uh, cardboard cutout women, right? Pixie says, "Don't quote me on this, but I think the second or third best-selling book is a math book that was written in ancient Greece." That's funny, but I guess that would track. Um, yeah, it just goes to show you, like, if you're judging by sales, you really gotta worry about what's at the top and how much credit you're really putting on those sales. But back in the day, I was reading a lot. I was reading a lot of harem novels. I was writing Pearly City, and I was also getting into light novels. And I came across this one called Mushoku Tensei. And since then, it's been taken down and made into an anime. So you can't read it as available as I was reading it back in the day, because the website I was reading it off of, it's gone. But it was a story about, and to narrow down the concept, it's a story about a reincarnation from childhood, like an isekai reincarnation from childhood. Very simple, very basic, but it was very entertaining. And as much as I didn't enjoy how pervy the character was, I really enjoyed everything else that came along with it. The growth and development of the characters, to the point that the perviness became more of a gag than a focal point. Some of the basic ways to break it down were, main character discovers magic and the in-depth discovery of that magic. Their living mother and father, as opposed to when you all of the isekais where the parents are just straight up dead, or other teen novels where the kids are just on their own. When the trailer for that anime dropped, I was there. I think there was a collective Discord moment of "you sly dog." Still on my watch list. Yes, I haven't watched it yet, and a part of it isn't because I don't want to watch it, but I don't want, like, the watching it experience to ruin the experience I had reading it and enjoying it. So there's just a little bit of fear on my end, and I'll admit that openly, that I'm a little bit of a coward. I'm also a little bit codependent. I want to watch it with someone else, but I also want it to be done, because it was one of the first light novels I ever read that had an ending, and probably to this day, maybe the only one I've ever read that had an ending. Like a straight up, like, conclusive ending, and then epilogue, and then, like the person died of old age and moved on, like that kind of ending, like, where there's no more you can write for this character, because they're not just dead and isekai, they just lived an old life and did what they had to do, and that's the end of their story, like, ending. Um, Not to spoil it for any of you who are just watching the anime or reading the manga, but anyways, it was a happy, slow life. There was a childhood friend character, and then there was an aggressive redhead that you hate at first. And so I took some of these ideas and I adapted them to my own story. And originally, Foxtails was just a story that I wanted to write because I wanted to write um, a better harem novel with female characters that were actually good. So I need to get into novels. Is that what you're saying? I mean, you should read what you want to read. I think there are a lot of light novels that are worth reading, and a lot of light novels that I've read have become anime in short time, not just Mushoku Tensei. But those are all on your priority, on your time. So yeah, so Foxtails became a story that really closely emulated Mushoku Tensei because I was just imitating what was I liked and thought was cool. So it was a story about a reincarnation from childhood. Sebas goes on a journey where he discovers magic, and there's in-depth breakdowns and discovery about it. His parents are alive and well and take care of him for a good portion of the novel. It's about a happy, slow life of just him getting to relearn the world, and he gets a childhood friend. And then there's also a aggressive red kid in the story that you hate at first when you first get to know them. And these are all like those concepts broken down and transitioned over. But the important part of this is what I did next, which is how I made it my own. So it's a story about a reincarnation from childhood. Well, the gimmick I threw at it was a story about a fox boy, and I created this whole fox beast kitten meritocracy society that he lived in, where harems are actually a thing, but like it was just a way to naturally introduce the harem concept as well. He discovers magic and in-depth discovery about the world, and his signature magic was blue fire, and he learns a lot of life lessons as a boy with from his parents. And speaking of his parents, his mother and father turns out to spoilers not be his actual mother and father. The people that take care of him are actually his aunt and uncle, and his actual mother and father are a king and his wife. And he has a happy, slow life. I'm gonna go for some milk. Exactly. Um, the thing is, like, the story was he was sent to his mom's aunt's house because of intrigue and conspiracy in the capital and fear of his life. So I believe the dad was told that he was dead or something, or that it wasn't even born. But I have to go back and reread. It's been a while since I've covered that part. Um, yeah, but so Sebas lives a happy slow life until his royal lineage is discovered. And in the meantime, he gets a childhood friend that's actually a cat girl instead of an elf, because I just wanted to do it. I felt it would be fitting for a Beastkin village. And then his fiance, and it turns when he's discovered as someone of royal lineage, stillborn. That's right. Uh, Sebas's mom tells the king, the dad, the biological dad, that it was a stillborn. Yep, exactly. And then once he's rediscovered, it's like after this war, and after the king has like really solidified his place as king, there's a lot of drama going on how to get the war to permanently stop. And there's no firstborn, there's no male children, and the enemy kingdom only has a female princess. And one of the ways that they really need to like get this war to end as a very solid solidarity moment would be to have a wedding between children to show that they're on good terms now. And Sebas is revealed and eventually goes over and becomes the fiance for this princess. And you really hate her. A lot of hate comments coming out when I first introduced her, because I did everything that like would trigger my readers. Everything that my main character loved, she would destroy. In the most literal of sense, like one of the big moments is like she ripped a book in half in front of him, and like every reader was just like on their war bikes, just ready to break the fourth wall and take out this little girl who was just so entitled and bratty. But in Mushoku Tensei, the main character also takes meets with a noble girl who's a redhead and is her teacher. I remember that era. Jesus was a time of turmoil. Yeah, because like it was introducing this character that I wanted everyone to hate, but I really wanted her to have a redemption arc. So that was the whole idea of her character, was to make her really hateable, so she has a really good redemption arc, which I feel like was what Eris got. And Eris was my favorite girl from Mushoku Tensei. The only problem is I didn't super 100% really like her until like later, like adult Eris, and like when you find out like spoiler things about their relationship. But and when they finally like get together, because of course it's a harem, they're gonna get together. It's not too spoilery, but Eris was my favorite character. I loved her. I thought she was cool. I was super into redheads at the time, so I made a redhead that was very similar to her, but in my own style and way, and became a badass and got her own redemption arc, and really went through a lot of character development in a very short amount of time. But at this point, has become, I would argue, is a fan favorite, and that people love her about as much as I do. But that said, those are just like how to take things away from stories that you like and apply them to your own work, and then make them your own way. Throw your own gimmicks at them. So that is effective reading. And the reason I want to talk about that first is because there's not really a place for it later on. But it applies to fight scenes really well. When you get into fight scenes, um, what you're really going to look at after you, hopefully after you've listened to me talk on for an hour or so about fight scenes, is you'll start to, when you read, you'll look at what makes fight scenes important in a new light, and be able to effectively read and critically think about what you're reading and be able to apply that to your own stories. So my goal is to give you tools so that you can, and a foundation, and less to give you rules and a structured program. So so hopefully after we talk about fight scenes and after this thing is all done, you'll go and you'll effectively read and get more basics and more tools, because this fight scene basics is very much a toolkit for you. So arguably, fight scenes are one of the most commonly requested questions I get that I don't have an easy answer for. I don't have a breakdown of it. It's so hard to write. Yeah. I don't have a breakdown of like, you should start with a punch, and then a kick, and then a straight kick, and then a straight punch, and then they throw a haymaker. Like, that's not good writing, and that's also not good teaching. It's also not what I want to do. So we're going to break down my experiences of what a good fight scene needs, and this should be broken down enough to apply to both large scale battles, small scale battles, one on one, one versus many. This should apply to all that. Yeah, and there's also different types of fights: weapons only, magic only, weapons and magic. There's also verbal fights. There's also discourse. But this should really break down those elements into how to really get a feel for how to do it. So this is can be broken down into three sections. First section is fight scene basics. Second section is how to write, and the third section would be the damsel in distress section, which is where I'm actually going to read something that I wrote, and we're going to go over it. There's more verbal, romantic, and angry. Yeah, there's all sorts of fight scenes, but hopefully they should give you a basics for what makes a good fight scene. So, what I believe makes a good fight scene, what makes it impactful and memorable and all around good, is first of all, you got to have stakes. There's got to be a reason for the fight scene. There's got to be something on the line. You can't just start every fight scene with, well, I bet you that I will win, and if I win, then the winner has or loser has to do one thing that the winner wants them to do. It's a very basic motivation to do and can be some good stakes, but it's not really what I want to focus on. Yeah. Fights and morals, no punches thrown, just actions, battling, and contrasting. Um, uh, that reminds me of Flint in Fox Tales 2 when Lancelot is trying to get him into fights, and so he's always challenging her to these nonsense fights. I believe one of them is where they have their hands tied behind their backs and they kick a brick at each other. And he proposes these rules, and while she is just trying to grasp that these are official rules for an actual legitimate duel that he can enforce, he takes that moment to just run away because he's a pirate and has no honor. He doesn't care. Anyways, so stakes. Something has to be at stake. Action. Of course, every fight scene is a fight scene because there is a fight. More importantly, every fight scene should progress the story or show some moment of growth in the main character, and then should have a moment of catharsis. Um, Very similar to how the story arc format works. But I want to get across that stakes is what's at stake. The action will be the actual fight itself, and then a reason for the fight, and then an actual ending to the fight, like what makes like the peter down, the catharsis of the event. So, stakes. Not to beat not to beat a stake with a dead horse. But at a certain point, you got to hype up the fight. At a certain point, your fight has to have a reason for existing. Something's got to be on the line. Is it somebody's life? Is it a lot of money? Um, and then nobody wants to read a fight with no stakes. There are lots and lots of novels and lots of writers that think they just need to include a certain number of fight scenes to make a good story, a good action story, a good adventure story. I don't believe that's the case. I believe once you understand the need and reason for fight scenes, you'll stop trying to make it like I need X number of fight scenes to be successful, and instead look at how do I make the next fight scene successful, or memorable, or good, or impactful. Um, because as soon as it's forgettable, you are wasting your audience's time. This is why the saving the damsel in distress fights are so effective, especially if done right, because they have all the basics of what makes a good fight scene, and we're going to go over that later. But essentially, everyone wants to save a damsel in distress because the stakes are high, you get to feel like a hero, there's good catharsis motivation, there's the fight where you look cool, etc. Like, it all works out. Its especially interesting fights involve enemies of either equal or greater skill, because readers always want to vote for the little guy. Now, that's not to say that overpowered MCs aren't fun, but an overpowered MC winning every fight has a different feel and a different audience than the weak MC who overcomes the odds and becomes strong, or or becomes overpowered, because then you can see some of those lessons at work. Action. So of course every fight scene needs action, needs punches, needs fists, needs thrones. But you also have to worry about what the fight scene entails. Is there a spar of words, wit, armies, guns, fists, swords, magic, bottles of water, bricks, and all the things. But what makes the action more impactful would be utilizing previously prepared story elements. If you've ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, consider the episode where Sokka gets to be a sword master. All of the things that they go over and learn, and how they culminate into the last battle, where he starts using the environment. And the teacher really does a really good breakdown for people who want to study it on on what makes this the whole scene good. He's like, "Oh, you're using the environment. You're using your strength and youth and speed and all that stuff." Like, it's a very good, well written short story in a grander theme of things, but really goes over what makes an effective fight scene. Because the fight scene is this young swordsman and his swordmaster, um, who begins sword training, but it's under the premise of a lie. And when the lie comes out, the fight scene begins, and then there's something at stake because you actually feel like the swordmasters after the apprentice's life. Anyways, I can go on and on about that scene. I just recommend go watch it. I don't remember what season or episode it is. I believe it's the last season, but I feel like a lot of OPMCs is just kind of like avoiding writing scenes because it always ends instantly. I would agree that is the case for many people who just want to jump right into OPMCs, people who just want to show off how cool their main character is right from the beginning. And I would say there's not a lot wrong with that if you find an audience for it, but it can lead to some lazy writing practices. But I would argue that every fight does not need to be life and death, but every fight needs to progress the story. Is what I would was where my every always statement would be. Something going back to the number of fights per action novel, I feel like it has something to do with D&D and Dungeon Effect, where to keep players engaged, DM tips will recommend one battle per session. Um, I feel like that is the case. I feel like, especially if you're writing like an action novel, you want there to be action. If you're selling a novel that's going to be full of action, you should have action in it. But another part of that argument needs to be said for what is the purpose of the story? Is the story to have lots of fight scenes? If, in which case, yes, you should probably hit a certain number of fight scenes. Is your story a romance? Well, how many fight scenes do you need? Well, maybe not like sword versus sword fight scenes, but if you look at like Regency novels, many of the fight scenes come off as like knives in the night, assassins, political intrigue, verbal sparring, and those kind of fight scenes can be compelling as well, just because there is still things at stake. There's still action happening. There's still um, tension. Which is why you have to understand that a fight scene is not just one person taking up a sword and fighting another person. A fight scene is, the way I want to build it up in this presentation, a culmination of conflict, if that makes any sense. The peak of that conflict. I'm not really praising that method, of course. While it works with some media like shonen anime, many stories feel token, so long as we talking about fist-to-fist fight. Yes, exactly. Growth and plot development. This is the point that I really want to drive home. I know we spent a lot of time on the last one, but nothing is worse than a needless fight animation that everyone forgets about later because it has no lasting impact on the story. I think it goes back to our point we were talking about just a second ago. Every fight scene you have should be a culmination of conflict. Should be a rise of conflict to a degree, and it should be that moment where the conflict is the highest, the tension is the highest, where words maybe don't matter anymore, or words, swords are almost taken out. But it should be that culmination, the highest point of that conflict. People actually die, or people will almost die. Nobody wants a story where you forget about it later. I would argue that a big part of that nobody wants a fight scene that doesn't matter to the main story would be the war arc in Naruto, where there's a lot of fight scenes which are really cool, but there's also it doesn't contribute to the plot because a lot of the time because you see at the end of like half of those episodes for like 10, 20, 30, 50 episodes, the very end of them is Naruto still running, even though he's theoretically like the fastest ninja of all time. Like I would agree that that is a good example of trying to get a quota of fight scenes out, where you really should just get on to the story. Let's see. If a fight scene is less important to the overall plot, consider telling over showing, or find a way to remove it. I feel like that's very important to knowing your priorities. You should, as always, when you write a story, you should figure out your priorities first and write towards those priorities, and then you'll know what to keep and what to get rid of and what to tell and what to show based on those priorities. If a fight scene in a fight scene, you decide who wins and loses and what's the cost. Let those reverberate through the rest of the story. That's, I think, the biggest problem with, I think, the war arc is it's just for the sake of showing a war, but many of those fights don't feel like they really impact the overall story or have lasting consequences. People just like, return main bad guys just die again, which doesn't feel like a lasting consequence. Doesn't feel like anyone paid a cost for that fight. Doesn't feel like anything changed. And in the end, Naruto still shows up to fight Madara. Like, every good fight scene should progress the plot in some way, and should be a device to progress the plot, not a device to just pad content. But it can be used to pad content if that's what you're going for. If that's what you feel like your story needs. And then after every fight scene, it needs to have a catharsis, and that needs to be like within the fight scene itself as well as the after effect. Um, Hitting someone should leave a wound, and a survivor. But surviving a life or death battle should also feel satisfying or engaging in some way. If you're going to ramp up a fight scene to the point where they come to blows, make those blows satisfying. Like, make the engagement like important to the degree that you really feel like you're next to it. That this person that we've all hated needs to just get hit just one more time until it's enough. And then maybe until it's too much and we all leave satisfied. We need the one guy to throw a chair across the room, like in so many school fight scenes and all that jazz. Um, Consider each fight as a story arc on its own and plan a suitable climax and ending, and then show the difference between the winner and the loser, if it's necessary, and if necessary, the comeuppance in a satisfying way. Many people need a comeuppance, and a fight scene is the culmination of that. And if somebody needs a comeuppance and doesn't receive that in a fight, it can lead to a lack in catharsis. Which is really bad for story writing if it's your last fight, but really good for story writing if it's one of your first couple of fights. You'll see these in things like Power Rangers, where the villain and the putties get beaten, but the main villains don't get beaten, and they just keep coming back until we finally fight the main villains. Pixeler says, the argument between She-Ra and the princess from She-Ra comes to mind. It's a verbal fight that leaves a deep, deep scar. It's a good plot driver for several episodes. Yes, and I would agree that fight scenes don't always need to be swords and pistols. They can be words. The fight scene, ultimately, you need to stop thinking about fight scenes as something that has to end with somebody being shot, stabbed, or dying in some way. A fight scene should be a culmination of conflict and receive a story arc. Which should receive story arc privilege. I think it's the best thing I've said so far. A fight scene should receive story arc privilege. You should have story arcs attached to fight scenes. They should be important enough in the story that they warrant their own beginning, middle, and end. So, good fight scenes versus bad fight scene endings. So, we're going to talk about The Last of Us, which is going to be triggering for a lot of people. But I'm going to argue what I know. So, The Last of Us Part 1 was considered a masterpiece for a long time because it had really good story and plot driving. And there's going to be some spoilers here, so I am sorry if I'm spoilering The Last of Us. They've been out for a good long while. There are plenty of YouTubers that have played them all the way through to the end. Like, go watch them and then watch the stream later. Damn, you really had to do it to him. Yeah. So, a satisfactory ending would be The Last of Us Part 1. Consider the stakes of Last of Us Part 1. Consider how we we journey through this world of zombies and the cause of them, and all these roundabout things we had to go through, not only with the zombies but with the uh, what the world created after, how the world was created afterwards, the factions that were around, who were good, who were bad, who tried to kill us, who tried to help us, and especially consider the main characters, Joel and Ellie. How they started off as two people that could have been more different. They couldn't have been farther from compatible. They couldn't have liked each other less. And to the end, at the end, in the last fight scene, the last really event of the game, their relationship had grown to a point where the main character Joel had chosen in the story narrative to save Ellie. It became one of those. If you've heard of the trolley problem, like who do you save, the one person or do you kill the many? Or one person or the four? Like you have to choose, and someone's gonna die. Well, Joel chose to spare Ellie. That was his choice. He had come to this emotional attachment to this girl who was like his daughter, who that was set up in the first scenes in the story, and his daughter died, and then Ellie essentially became, I won't say a replacement daughter, but became the daughter he never had because um, that daughter died. Um, and for those of you who don't know the story, it's a story about zombies, and Ellie is a girl who, and the zombies are caused by fungus instead of a virus, and Ellie is immune to the zombie causing fungus. And your goal is to take Ellie to this to destination A, and where she is used to create the cure for zombies, essentially. But that plan gets derailed for plot reasons until you finally get to uh, point B, which is also the facility that's going to, yeah, the world's most severe fungus infection. Yeah, where you find out that it's not just like a quart of blood that they need to create this cure. They're going to essentially drain her dry and kill her. Well, Joel decides he doesn't want Ellie to die, and then essentially sabotages years of research and the one true potential way to solve this world crisis. But Joel cannot abandon Ellie even if she wants to be left there. Like in kind of a crisis teenage moment where I'm going to sacrifice myself for the greater good, Joel still saves her. And it comes in a great cost, but it's a very good story-driven moment where you really see how the relationship between the two of them that has progressed over the story has changed what would have been the ending had they gotten here sooner. Now, an unsatisfactory ending. And this will be for spoilers for Last of Us 2, which I have not played, which I only know from from a little bit, so I may be crucified on this. But essentially what I understand is that Last of Us 2 had a very unsatisfying ending. Over the course of Last of Us 2, we revisit Joel and Ellie, who are survivors in the zombie apocalypse, which they are now partially responsible for. At a certain point, I don't know if it's the main antagonist, but a main antagonist kills Joel, a character that is beloved by so many in a questionable decision made by the writers and producers. And so the entire game becomes about Ellie surviving the zombie apocalypse and getting, I'm sure, from point A to point B. The end of the story, the very last like effective fight scene, is Ellie facing Joel's killer. Now, to this point, as Ellie, you have killed many people to get to this point. many people and many monsters, and I'm sure animals to begin with. There's no value of life to be said in this world, and Ellie has not grown up with a lot of it because she's like was young and grew up to at least teenager in the story plot. She comes face to face with Joel's killer, and they fight. And Ellie, in a spectacular moment of failure, instead of killing the girl, or instead of giving the player at least the choice whether to kill her or spare her, spares her out of some misplaced ideal that she has now overcome something, but it doesn't feel good. There's no proper catharsis. You have a whole game where Joel was the main character and we loved him, and then we're faced with his killer and we don't even get a choice whether to kill her or not. After we've killed so many people, and we'll probably kill more people considering the nature of the world, it doesn't feel true to the world. It doesn't feel true to the characters. It really feels like a writer mishap, and it really, even more than Joel dying, not being able to kill his killer really had a negative and unsatisfactory ending and negative impact to the game and the reputation of the game makers and the writers and the studio that made it, and essentially, I would argue, destroyed the franchise. Like the fact that they came, like they. I think they could have still killed Joel and got away with it if they had made a more satisfactory comeuppance, but they didn't. For some reason, they almost, it feels like they loved the enemy more than Ellie and more than the audience and wanted her to just live for plot armor reasons and like maybe some selfish politically motivated reasons, but it was not good. The way they pulled it off was not good. The only change, if I were to make a change to make that game for the better, just one change, I would introduce the choice whether to kill or spare that villain. And I think that if it had come out as a release with that, it wouldn't have been nearly as bad of a game. But I do understand that the gameplay was good, but there was just some story elements that were off about it. But we're not going to talk about that. We're talking about unsatisfactory endings. So let that be a warning to you. If you build up an enemy for so long as the main enemy, and you don't give them their proper comeuppance, you can ruin the story narrative. So remember at some point that people that earn karma should get it. So, we've talked for an hour, and now for our next hour and a half. Writing a fight scene, what we all came here for. Every fight scene is a balancing act involving or resolving conflict. There should be build-up, exposition, direct action, and inner monologue. And actually, I feel like that should be different. It should be exposition, build-up, direct action, or exposition, build-up, inner monologue, and direct action. But to be fair, these four elements, it'll be a balancing act using these four elements, and they don't have to be in any specific order. So build-up. Pre-fight dialogue and the stakes. What starts the fight? What's at stake? Who is likely to win? And why is this fight important? That's going to be your build-up. Things you use to build it, to raise the stakes and raise tension. Exposition. How are they fighting? What are they fighting with? Where are they fighting? The world around the fighting. Like everything you need to set up to get the fight, to be able to solidify the fight in the reader's minds before it starts, do it. The direct action. The fight itself. Description of the fighting. You describe how they are swinging, how they are standing, running, jumping, flying. And if you're doing a physical fight, my advice, my one true advice, is to pay attention to positioning. If you, in a fight, knock someone over, you should act as if they are knocked over. Do not knock someone over and then they throw a punch immediately as if they're still standing up. Right? Keep track of them. If they put their foot some way, remember that if you're saying they put a foot some way, that's important for a reason. If they're doing a flurry of motions, they're doing a flurry of motions. There are many ways to uh, cop out a fight scene, but a lot of ways that a lot of things you really need to be mindful and improve of. And I think positioning is my one advice. And if you're doing a physical fight, keep in mind where they are, how close they are, how far away they are, and what they're doing with their bodies. Inner monologue. This will be the inner fight. This is things that the character's talking to themselves, their schemes, their plans, their strategies, the dirty tricks. One character, one person analyzing the other, the logic out of their sword style using, the magic formulas they're coming up with, what magic to use next, the skill menu options they have, the impact of stats on the battle, like I have this much strength and they have that much strength and they're going to win if we go on a strength contest, but my dexterity is this high, so we're going to do dex. That's all inner monologue, that's all important, and that's part of the balancing act. So once again, the build up, exposition, direct action, and inner monologue. To put this all into practice, to put this all into some kind of identifiable way to like read a story and break it down, we're going to talk about the damsel in distress formula, which almost every isekai has got to have to as part of the trope. Sorry, I'm getting a drink. So if you read any isekai, you'll recognize this trope. Essentially, the main character discovers a carriage being attacked, the inner debate on how to act. At some point, it's revealed that there's a pretty girl involved and in danger. They're the overpowering of mod enemies. Usually there's a more dynamic fight scene with the boss or the strongest enemy, and then the victory over the foe and the damsel's gratitude. And sometimes that's the damsel to fall in love on the spot. Other times it's the damsel to decide this person is the strongest person in the world and they need them in their arsenal. But that is the most basic formula that I have for the damsel in distress. So we're going to do application to story format. And I actually went through a crisis where I was like, hold on. Do I have the damsel in distress in any of my works? Anywhere? And I found one. And it's in an unpublished work called The Villainous Happy Ending, which was strongly based off of this idea of mob in an otome world. If you know that light novel, manga, and anime that's coming out, or just came out. Just like Mushoku Tensei, it's just me writing my own thing with a spin on what's already been done. Effective reading. So, I understand if people have to go at any point during this, but this is going to be breaking down a fight scene. And what is the most important thing about a fight scene is I would argue that it's important to the story. I mean, yes, Catgirl and Foxtails, whose name I can't remember as I write this when they encounter Rolo. Yeah, I guess that would be true. But I think that would be just as long as this. So this is going to be me reading. So at a certain point, let's see, 1 minute. It is minute 106. I don't know how to put timestamps in Twitch. I'll figure it out later. But this is, we're going to break down what we see in each of these little parts. So this will be exposition, and at some point, pretty girls revealed and in danger. So, some short exposition on this before I just start reading word for word. This is a story about a guy who gets reincarnated as the last boss villain right during his tragedy arc, essentially, and has to figure out how to not be tragedy arced, but at the same time he is in love with the other end boss girl, the demon queen, and wants to somehow get together with her. It's a it's set up kind of like a harem story, but it becomes a it's really more deceptive because it's him pining for one girl and does everything he can for this girl. All right. So this will be right after he gets into the body after some exposition for the story. So there might be some missing pieces, but I try to keep as much as the context as possible um, without going too far. So I can't help but pity this kid, though. The past 8 years have been rough, but thanks to the last 4 years of my memory, mixing with his sliding into his body has been much more like sliding into a glove, instead of creepily taking over the body of an 8-year-old meat suit. Yeah, creepy. Moving on. Plans. I look out the window again. I am a useless 8-year-old kid with no magic training, hidden away by his father, barely spoken to by his sister, the only one in the whole estate that treats me like a person, and neglected or straight abused by the staff. How the frickety frack did Clyde go from pitiful child to the strongest final boss in 3 installments in Exilium? I know that at age 14, villain Clyde comes to blows with his father and kills him. My powers are awakened, and I will take over the estate through dominance and fear. I could probably expedite the process if I killed the dear old dad now, but all the anger and resentment I had built up were effectively pacified by my more peaceful memories. Besides, the only reason that I was able to take over the estate was because the old man finally gave in to my sister, pleading for my education as a noble. It was on the day she was kidnapped. It was on the day she was kidnapped. He had to go out and save her personally. She was deeply scarred, and in order to pamper and soothe her, he finally caved in and started my education. But that occasion was a double-edged sword, since she more heavily began to cling to our father, and her will power to stand up to him diminished, which would cause a rift between us. This rift was double enlarged when she couldn't help but watch the horrible treatment I received from tutors after our father told her not to mind it. I tapped on the windowsill. Honestly, I would like to prevent the kidnapping from happening. My elder sister Claudia didn't ever get over it, and always shied away from a man's touch. She ended up marrying a decent man in the end, but she didn't have any kids before she was murdered in a political move against her husband. If I remember correctly, it all went down the day that one of the villainesses showed up. The future saintist comes from our territory and pays us a visit. Pays the Lord a visit. I'm as good as chaff at this point. So, we have exposition, and we have not one pretty girl, but two. If you're not into sister complexes, which is not what I'm going for with the story, but it does kind of happen a little bit, the saintess is a common trope and is revealed and is a pretty girl. So we know who the main character is. We know what's going on with the story. We know where they are. We have an understanding that's in a Regency type setting. We have an understanding that he's not treated very well, and that he is probably stuck in his room. So, what do? We raise the stakes. After I looked out the window, I saw a gilded carriage pulled up to the estate. While mulling over my fate, it had the fancy emblem of the church on it, and after a few moments, a girl was let out of the carriage. One I couldn't help but recognize. Alicia Wayguider. Well, for now it was just Alicia since she was a commoner. Once she is formally adopted by the church as a saint, they'll bless her with the holy name of Wayguider. I sighed and banged my head against the glass. I've only got one day. How am I going to pull this off? I don't even know anything about the event. So, in this, we have the stakes being raised. Not only do we have a pretty girl who is in jeopardy and the sister who is in jeopardy, we have that we only have one day to fix things. And the fact that we don't have much information. So we got build-up and inner monologue. Now this all hasn't been inner monologue, but Then, something strange happened. I met the eyes of the saintess, or at least I think I did. She was traditionally pretty for a small lolly, but I wasn't into that. My goal, the Demon Queen, was the only girl for me. I waited for her to enter the estate and ran to the door. I cracked the door and found that there wasn't a guard next to my door, but there was one at the end of the hallway, so I can't escape this way. Back to the window. It looks like I'm 3 stories up. The past Clyde would never attempt to escape this way, but the molding and the design of the mansion were elaborate, so there were plenty of handholds. I was a bit of a monkey when I was growing up, climbing on things to show for my friends and cute girls. Escape is number 1 on my list. I can't do anything for anybody if I'm stuck in my room. And they hardly feed me now. Who knows how long it'll take for them to notice that I'm missing. So, we get into inner debate and how to act. There's no written climb down sequence. We're not going to talk about that because we just skip over that because we want to get to the action. I made it. I don't know how I made it, but I did. My stamina just isn't what it used to be, but that is to be expected. If only I calculated it beforehand, I nearly fell to my death halfway down. But with skill, talent, and prudence, I slipped past the guards and out to the city. A thought occurs to me. What if I just left? What if I save my sister and go? Or maybe what if I just go? No. Forget the saintess. Saintess. Wow, for some reason I just can't say that word. The saintess. But my sister is a decent person. I can't just let her get kidnapped. Alright. First, let's do something about this white hair. Fortunately, while I was looking for a pair of shears or some kind of hood, I noticed one of the gardeners suspiciously leaving the estate with a hood, and I decided to follow him. Skill acquired. Sneak. All this RPG stuff is gonna get to my head if I have to focus too much on it. At least at a low level ability like sneak. But at least a low level ability like sneak will stop people from noticing me too quickly. That, and it would give me a sizable damage bonus if I attacked from sneak. Using sneak, I was able to follow the gardener through the back alleys. This shady asshole. If he's going to sell out my sister, then I'm going to kill him. Yep, kill him dead. The only thing I managed to find that I could use as a weapon was a brick, though. But beggars can't be choosers. So, the inner debate, we have how to act, we have his thought processes, we're breaking down things that are important to the world, the skills that there's RPG stuff going on, the fact that he can acquire a skill just by acting on it, his intentions to kill the gardener. So, in this short part of the story, I want to illustrate how sometimes you don't need huge action sequences to really get an action scene across. As long as you can do the bare minimum and progress the story at the same time. You don't need a 3-page action sequence to get across the fact that action had happened. Unfortunately, due to the new sensation of the sneak ability, it seems as if I have no muscle memory in any tangible sense because I barely have any muscles despite my previous efforts. In a way, I guess this is my third life. Maybe in time I'll regain some of my first life's memories and magic, but my second life is a huge wall to overcome. No use relying on uncertainty. It'd be better to build up new skills. Even if I have to fight the heroine with a brick, I'll do it. Yeah, so that's alluding to the fact that this is his third life. His first life he lived as villain Clyde. His second life he lived in the modern world. In his third life he's back and now has the experience of a modern world. In the meantime, I finally made it to a shady corner where the gardener met with 2 hooded men that just screamed criminal. I got as close as I could and ducked behind a box. The young miss and the saintess would be exploring the town in an hour. It seems the young miss insisted they go in disguise with only a few guards. The confectionery at the corner seems to be the destination of interest, the gardener said. Good work. The money we promised. The taller hooded criminal handed the gardener a sack of coins. And with that, you have sealed your place in hell. When the gardener left the When the gardener left, the tall criminal spoke to the slightly shorter hooded criminal. Gather the boys at Gotho's Tavern in 10 minutes. On it, boss, the shorter man said, and they parted ways. Good. That gives me time to deal with this gardener. He was too focused on counting the coins and didn't realize I was stalking him. I timed my kick to the back of his knee, causing him to stumble. As he turned to see who did it, I managed to hit him around the temple. Hit him in the temple with the corner of the brick. He went down like a sack of tater tots. But he wasn't dead, so I steeled my nerves and bashed his pretty face into the alley pavement until it wasn't recognizable. Critical attack, critical attack, critical attack. Proficiency with blunt weapons acquired. Plus experience. Level up. So we've set out in this scene the standard of action, what we see sometimes, and how we've established a system of what we can expect when it comes to attack things more often. So evidence of growth. There it is. I'm pretty sure. The sheer sign that I killed him. Experience points. The proficiency with blunt weapons is nice. It'll make them easier to use. And I'll be able to do more damage theoretically. For my sister, I said, dropping the bloody brick. Status. Clyde Blackwater. The silver translucent screen appeared in front of me with my name at the top. Title, Cursed Child. Class, Hidden. Final Boss. Level 2. Skills. Sneak. Second form. Proficiencies. Blunt weapons. Inventory unlocked. So, we've shown the consequences of the actions in a good way. The evidence of growth, so the story can progress. So it also progresses the plot. I got the inventory. That's a life or death kind of ability I can't live without. Especially since I don't have a safe way to keep anything that is mine. I don't have time to do much looting and analyzing my inventory to see if it works the same way as the game. Did, so I just concentrated on storing the bag of coins in the inventory and it disappeared from my hand. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to store the body, but I didn't try very hard. I did store the brick, though. It may be just a blood-coated brick to some people, but to me, it was an invaluable blunt force instrument of justice. Now you may be wondering, Clyde just fucking killed someone. Don't you feel anything? Yes, sticky and smelly. Honestly, I'm too hungry to puke, and I know I've killed people before, so whatever mental block people have to overcome has long since passed. More importantly, I'm on a mission. I decided to loot the body and steal the quote. It's covered in blood, so I'll just store it for now. Getting away from the body as fast as possible is my priority, and I make way to the tavern the criminal mentioned. So, we have the finishing of a short story arc, and then more catharsis and rising actions. Catching a break just wasn't in the cards for me. They may have a way to see my inventory, which meant even having these coins was dangerous, but being completely broke just wasn't an option for me. When I make it to the alley between the tavern and the tavern stables, I take a moment to look at my stats. When leveling up, there's a matter of gaining a set of points to distribute to my stats. I had ignored it for expedience, but another thing that had been revealed when I leveled up were my personal stats. If I'm going to accomplish anything today, I'm going to need a whole lot more stamina and strength, so I put 5 points into both stamina and strength. This may not seem like a huge improvement, but I'm no longer winded from walking, and I finally have some strength in my muscles instead of being skin and bones. And then I included this just because I had cut it out earlier, but this is the stat spread I have for the character. So on the left side we have the stats they originally had, and then he adds the points to Constitution and Strength. I do have a system for the numbers and what they mean, but I won't go over it because it's just more stat fluff. The important thing to take away from this is that it does reveal that his second form activates when his health reaches 50%, and prevents any damage for 5 seconds. It adds 200 to magic and 25% to all other stats until fully recovered. Recovers 1% per second until full. He also points out later that his MP is super big and how stats worked in the game, but I'm leaving that out for this example. Because this is just stat fluff for the sake that you have. You know that I'm not avoiding telling you stuff, it's just there for, it just takes up so much space on a page. Exposition and final build-up. Numbers and stats. Why is this important? Well, I'm the final boss. It's obvious my stats should be on the ridiculous side, so I pose a challenge against the party of the strongest and most coordinated warriors in the world. I may be weaker than the average adult right now, but by the time I grow up, I'll be the strongest being in the world. I've already learned my lesson about letting that go to my head. The first set of odd memories about being evil Clyde reinforced that hubris downfall. Bringing myself back to reality, looking over my stats, I return to the matter at hand. Climbing the wall to the window, where the secret meeting was being held, my new strength makes the climb a breeze. And I don't almost die when I escape my room. So that's the plan. Stop complicated things. We grab the girls, jump into the carriage by the shop, and split while the others distract the gods. We'll meet up at the hideout. Now get into places, and stop asking stupid questions. We have to keep the girls alive. We won't get paid otherwise. It sounded like the same guy who paid the gardener. I couldn't see into the room without exposing myself, so I just listened. After we meet at the hideout, we go meet the clients and get paid enough to retire in the tropics. I dropped from the ledge by the window I was listening in through and made my way to the shop the ambush was gonna be at. I needed to sabotage that cart, and I knew just the way to do it. I measured the rope I acquired from the stables. Then I found a suspicious carriage with a lock on the back door near the confectionery shop that my sister would be visiting. I tied the axle of the carriage to the sturdy log and dropped that log down a manhole under the carriage. That way, when the carriage drove off, the unconventional anchor would stop the carriage, or more likely rip off the axle and the two back wheels. Sneak prevented the sleeping driver from noticing me during the setup. Then I hid under the carriage and listened. And hid under the carriage and wished that I had more than a few bricks to work with. Hopefully, all I was doing was stalling until the guards showed up, creating a loud enough ruckus that should be enough to have everyone running. So, the final build-up of the scene, we have it all set. We have the stage set. We know where the fight's going to take place, more or less. We have his weapon arsenal, which are bricks. We know how he fights, which is bashing him in the head. We know that he has a certain amount of skills, but that he's weaker than the adults. We know that he's trying to foil a plan, but all he's trying to do right now is stall for time and create a ruckus. And so his goals are pretty clear. We have build-up, and so we have the discovery of the carriage being attacked part. Then the screaming. My older sister and the Saintess struggled as they were carried out of the shop and tossed into the carriage. We got him! Go, go, go! The leader shouted while banging on the carriage. Then I watched as it moved swiftly, revealing me and my rope. I waved at the leader as he noticed me and the rope. Wait! He tried to shout, but it was too late. The rope caught, and a spectacular crash happened as the rear wheels fell out and the carriage struck the ground. It threw off the leader and his companion, who were holding on to the back of the carriage after it crashed. Overcoming mob enemies. So we have used context clues to reveal how fighting happens, and some direct action will be involved in this part of the scene. I used this chance. The leader was my goal. He rolled to cushion the fall, but before he could do more than that, I smashed his eye in with the corner of the brick and didn't let up until... Critical hit, critical hit, critical hit, Critical hit, critical hit. Increased proficiency with blunt weapons. Experience gained. Level up, level up, level up. So we know that he gets critical hits when he strikes them in the head. We know that he hit him enough times to kill him because he got experience. And those are all really good context clues for this system of fighting. The way I have it set up. And the consistency is also important. I didn't have time to distribute my points when the other kidnapper stood and delivered a powerful kick to my side which sent me tumbling. "You little shit!" he cursed when he noticed I had managed to foil their plot and kill their boss. "Don't hurt my brother!" my sister shouted from the carriage. "Run, Clyde! Go! Get help!" More overpowering of mob enemies. So we have some inner monologue with some action taking place here. Second form activated. Magic unlocked. Choose 3 spells from list. Wow. I don't have time for anything. I only have 5 seconds of invulnerability, and I'm already at 50% health. Getting hit at 1 HP wouldn't kill me, but I can't imagine pushing that line right now. Who knows what it'll do to my combat potential. I also can't risk going into berserk state if that kind of thing happens. I know that Clyde has a berserker form in the final boss fight, and I think that it's something that unlocked during the original event when he killed his father, when his father beat him half to death. I scroll to the list and pick the one I know and I can use right now. Catapult. I roll to my feet and just chuck the brick at the kidnapper's face as I cast the new spell. Critical hit. Increased proficiency with blunt weapons. Experience gains. Level up. Then he had no face. Or head. So we have inner monologue, we have dynamic action. Even though he dies really quickly, we can kind of get a sense of view of it. The fight scene continues in lots of little tiny engagements as we get into more some more exposition and explaining the gimmick of the world. The force of the low-level spell, the low-level throw stuff around spell, wasn't commonly acknowledged by this world or the fans of the franchise. It was too niche, was the common argument, and had a weight restriction. But it was fun as hell, so I used it in my later playthroughs when I was goofing around. One thing I had never done was increase blunt weapons proficiency and use the spell. The kidnapper was low-leveled, and I had a magic power of 201. But I was not expecting his head to completely vaporize. So, exposition of the gimmick, the boss second and final form gimmicks going on here. The girls from the carriage screamed at the sight. Wrong spelling of sight. Rough draft, sorry. I rushed to the leader's corpse and found the keys and went to unlock the door at the back of the carriage. "Don't worry, I'm going to get you out of there," I said as I unlocked the door. But as I pulled it open, the driver had rounded the carriage, pulled me by my collar, and flung my child's body backward onto the ground. So this is going to be the more dynamic fight with the boss enemy, with more direct actions going on. So less inner monologues and more play-by-play. "Don't move," he said while pointing a handheld crossbow at me. He then reached in and grabbed my sister's hair. "If I have at least one of them, then..." I looked towards his blind spot behind him and shouted, "Thank God you came!" Of course, it was no one, but he still looked. I rolled to my feet, grabbed his wrist to point the crossbow away from me, and then used my free hand to punch him in the crotch. "Run for it! I got this!" I shouted. The coachman let go of my sister long enough to hit me, but I didn't let go of his wrist. Instead, I managed to bite him while my sister and the saintess ran out of the carriage. "Ow! You little shit! Do you realize what you have just done?" He hit me hard enough to knock me off. He then shot me with the crossbow before he ran off. "Clyde! No!" my sister screamed. "Young miss! Saintess!" I heard my sister scream and the call of guards from around the corner. Their swords were bloody and it was obvious what had happened to the other thieves. Or kidnappers, I guess. Looking down at my chest, I am grateful to see the bolt hasn't pierced my heart. It wasn't even close, since it struck my leg. Like an idiot, I ripped out the bolt from my thigh out of pure instinctive adrenaline driven impulse. Summon brick, I say, as I can't think of another way to swap the bolt for the spare brick in my inventory. Then I threw it. I was trying for another headshot, but only managed to take out his leg. It sheared right off with the force of the brick. Oh joy! My vision is turning red. I grabbed my leg as I laid on the ground. Well, this won't kill me, but I'm wondering if I showed too much of my hand, and now running away wasn't really an option. Now that I couldn't now that I could help it, I have leveled up a few times, and now I have a chunk of points to distribute. I looked to the gates of the city off in the distance. Freedom. It was so close, and yet so far away. Um, and then the lasting impact, or at least the direct impact of his choices, come in his comeuppance. Whether justified or not, it adds tension to the story itself. Clyde, are you okay? My sister ran over and kneeled on the ground. Alicia, can you do anything? He's the cursed child, Alicia said uncertainly. He is my little brother, and he just saved us, my sister cried. It's okay. It doesn't hurt any more than Dad's beatings. At least I'm only bleeding from one part of my body this time. I laughed, but it sure hurt like a bitch. Alicia had pity in her eyes. Why did you do it? I looked over to the woman who could be described as the embodiment of sunshine. She had long golden locks of hair, eyes as blue and crisp as the sky, and cute childish features that just made you want to cuddle and protect her very existence. Someday, she'd even grow to a bombshell beauty that'd make you second guess changing religions. My sister was in trouble. Even my father will blame me for the kidnapping. Isn't it natural to protect your family? I answered. Why are you here? You could have gotten yourself killed, my sister cried. I was trying to escape. When I overheard someone going to kidnap you, I couldn't just leave without saying goodbye. I lied through my teeth. But I was so pitiful, the two young ladies couldn't have suspected that I was just manipulating them. But I had to, as means of self-preservation. I couldn't allow either of them to see me in some different light. I took one long, meaningful look at the gate that was beyond my reach. The saintess reached her hands forward and stuttered the words of a healing prayer until I placed my hands on hers. Don't bother, darling. I stood up with a pronounced limp. This is only a flesh wound. I'm the cursed child, remember? When the time comes to get rid of me, only a holy weapon will finish me off. I held my hand over the wound and applied pressure. Luckily, there was no bleeding stat debuff to make my health drop any lower. I leaned against the carriage as the guards came running to point their swords at me. On the ground, wench! One of them ordered. But I just stood up, I complained. Nothing I said would have done any good, since he grabbed me by the throat and slammed me on the ground. You are under arrest for the kidnapping of the young miss of Blackguard and the Saintess. He pressed his knee against my neck and tied my hands into a knot. Harder, Daddy, I taunted, causing the guards to be more forceful. I heard my sister and the Saintess calling for them to stop, but the adrenaline was rushing to the heads of the guards, and they began punching and kicking me. Whether it was for show or to take out their anger for almost letting their wards be kidnapped, who could say? So victory. And then the damsel gratitude, and there'll be more damsel gratitude to come. But the story is kind of to paint this character in a pitiful light, and so that's kind of what we're going for with the continuing story. But we'll get into the catharsis of the event, I promise. What is the meaning of this? A commanding voice resounded to stop the bullying of my ribs and spleen. Paladin Julian, this is the cursed child. He has obviously orchestrated this kidnapping, one of the guards from my estate explained. A child orchestrated this? I find that hard to believe. Move off him. Let me inspect the boy, Prince Paladin Juilliard ordered. I wonder if we can have a Discord event where readers can write a scene for these kinds of streams to be shown off. What do you think, Captain? I think that idea has potential, but I'll need more planning to figure out how to execute it. But definitely is a good idea and has potential. The guard growled. Sorry. Move off him. Let me inspect the boy, Paladin Juilliard ordered. All due respect, Paladin. This is our jurisdiction, the guard protested. All due respect, guardsman. This has to do with the Saintess's kidnapping. Are you prepared to defy the church in an official inquiry? The guard growled and applied a dangerous amount of pressure before he got off my neck. Stand him up, the paladin ordered. Two other paladins grabbed my arms from either side and pulled me to my feet to look at the grand display of a paladin. Juilliard wore white armor with golden trim. It was magnificent, and I could feel power oozing off of him as he held me at sword point. What was your part in this? Whether I was the architect of their rescue or capture, I do not pretend my words have anything but wait to sink me in a pool and but to sink me in the pool of contempt, I said. Strike me or spare me, but don't waste my time with frivolities to make yourself feel better about it. Will you really not answer me? I could save you. Lord Paladin, neither my father nor the church can afford to be saved in this manner. The cursed child saving the saintess? Not only will they laugh, but they will condemn me for uttering such a phrase. Any justice will be damned for the sake of my conviction. I explained. Not for his sake, though, I eyed the saintess. The truth of cursed children is that we are not born wicked. We are just born. It is the resentment of men and superstitious assholes that create monsters of the past. You saw what happened. Where will you choose to stand in this cycle of hate? Don't you dare speak to her with your filthy mouth any longer, another paladin slapped me. The saintess is above reproach. No, he's right. He rescued us. He killed men, but it was on my behalf. If he's punished or imprisoned for saving my life, then I take the whippings with him and sit next to him in his cell. The saintess Alicia stood up for me. No longer uncertain of herself, this was the hard-nosed and stubborn villainess that I knew from the game. In the game, the church, in her mind, was infallible because she was so grateful to them for saving her from poverty and providing for her family. She only learned of the truth of corruption. She only learned the truth of the corruption of the clergy near the end of her life. With the last few months of her life, she reformed the remnants of the church from the wreckage of the kingdom that evil Clyde destroyed, then gave her life in one last stage to create an example, an opportunity for the heroine. At least, most of the time. It was preventable. But that had nothing to do with me right now. Now I have unleashed the saintess on my behalf. Hopefully, I have opened the eyes. I've opened her eyes so that she doesn't fall victim to the clergy's brainwashings, and with any luck, she'll purge the worst of them and revitalize the church before they crumble under themselves. The effects of actions taken, and then the secondary character's response. So, in this part, I want to really emphasize that your fight scene shouldn't just have consequences for your character, but it should impact other characters to the point where other characters should really be engaged in what happened, or at least it should affect them, or you should show it somehow. A fight scene is cool if it's just one-on-one, but when it applies to the story and the narrative, that's when it becomes more effective. True to her word, Alicia kept me out of prison, and when she said she would wait with me inside my room, she was horrified by my lodgings. Both she and my sister had no idea how I had been treated, and my sister threw a fit that had the whole house in turmoil, while the carriage driver and other surviving thieves confessed to not knowing who the heck I was. In the meantime, my father's displeasure. To my father's displeasure, I was given a proper room right next to my sister's. It was formerly a guest room for the saintess, but they both insisted it be given to me. I think I created a monster as the saintess flexed her authority. But now that I've changed the flow of the story, I just have to live with the consequences of my actions. Over the course of a single day, I had written the world's natural progress. This changes nothing, my father told me at the dining table that night. Marquis Blackwater was nothing short of a military man. Even at supper he wore his black uniform with golden accents. His black hair was neatly trimmed, and his red eyes pierced me with his gaze. He was dashingly handsome, and although I'm sure he had received more than his fair share of marriage applications, not only for his looks, but for his looks and power. Claudia will handle the arrangements from here on out. Do your best not to bring any more shame to our house, but know that nothing will change the fact that Claudia is my chosen heir. Father, be reasonable, my sister pleaded with him. Marquis Blackwater, he's your only son. Don't nobles care most for their sons? Alicia argued, but neither of them would be able to move Armin Blackwater to change his man. After all, I had killed him to become the only heir of Blackwater in one lifetime. I don't plan on killing him. Then I should give up on becoming the lord of the territory. And now with the damsels being implied that they will be in the plot more. And this is something you have to realize, that when you do something like this, you do have to include follow-up later in the story. So it says that they'll write letters. So at some point in the story, you got to introduce this damsel writing letters to the main character. So details are important. Calm down, father's being more than reasonable, if not downright benevolent, I stated. Brother, what are you saying? It is your birthright, Claudia argued, but I held up my hand. Consider his position. If he announced the cursed child as his heir, it would be no different than declaring rebellion against the royal family and the gods. What father is saying is that one good deed won't change that, and 100 good deeds may never change anything. I looked at the Marquis. Isn't that right, father? Very astute. You may be my spawn in more than my spawn in more than name only, he begrudgingly complimented me. In name only, but now my existence is known. It would be unordinary if I did not receive the bare minimum of education. It would bring shame if the only son of Blackwater family was discovered to be an illiterate, poorly dressed scoundrel with no manners. I held my poker face and watched my father. I'll be taught my letters when I go to the city. Could I write you both? Claudia asked. It would seem proper education is in store, my father said solemnly. Especially manners. Of course, my lord. One must always give proper respect to our betters. I bowed my head respectfully, and he clicked his tongue at the first proper he clicked his tongue as the first proper food I'd seen had been brought out to us. And now for the catharsis of the story, as we continue on. Under my father's scrutinizing gaze, I devoured the food, without making a huge fool of myself. It wasn't smart to have perfect manners, since I had never been taught before. I could feel my father counting every infraction I made. I calculated what he was going to do to get back at me. After all, this was the man that beat me to death. At that point, the evil Clyde had grabbed the berserk feat and turned the tables on him. So, when I went to bed that night, I was bathed and dressed in decent clothes. The plush bed was out of this world, and I relished the opportunity to lay in it. So, as you can see in this example, that the fight scene was more impactful than just some dude beating some criminals with some bricks. We really built up this image of this pitiful person saving his sister. We built up the mechanics of the world. We set up a plot device for having an inventory involved, showing off the partial uh, boss features for the first time. One of my things of the story that I really wanted to experiment with was, what if I made a main character that had boss mechanics instead of main character mechanics? And if a main character mechanic is to level up and get skills, what if we had a boss mechanic that was, we have to lose a certain amount of life to get and be able to use certain spells or to get more power to our spells or abilities, things like that. And so to really play on that dynamic. Of course, there does get to be more that goes along with it, but we now have, from the very first scene, we have the main character in a room in the third floor, and he has nothing to his name, and it's terrible, and he smells bad, and looks bad, and feels bad, and then has a fight scene, and now he's in a plushy room, he's bathed, he doesn't smell bad, he gets to lay in a bed and eat good food. And it all was because of the fight scene. The fight scene was not just the main character swinging a brick around. The fight scene was an entire event where the main character was able to calculatedly improve his standing in the world and change events in the world, which you should really think about and consider when you write fight scenes in the future. A fight scene and a good fight scene and a memorable fight scene are more than just me throwing a brick at a bad guy or me doing 5 pages of descriptions as the fight scene goes on. It should be something that develops the plot. It should be something that shows off the world. It should be something that really plays to the strengths of the story you want to tell. So, um, we got to the end. This, of course, is a longer one because we analyzed some things. Um, of course, some other things we could have done is we could have changed this dynamic fight scene with the boss enemy. We could have made it longer. This part of the story where we smash his head with a brick in, instead of just writing critical hit, and experience gained. If we weren't doing like a game like system, we could do more descriptive elements involved with the direct action, like every time my brick crushed his face, I saw more blood, or the streets ran red. Um, I just kept swinging and swinging and swinging until there was nothing left but red on my vision and around me. You do not have to do this, but this particular way of fight scene, but this is how I chose to do it for this setting of story. I think it was apt because it really got across that he was hit multiple times without being like supremely gory, but really showed off the game system and how integrated it is in the story itself. He got multiple levels up for this bad guy because he was a boss guy as opposed to the first guy where he only got one level up. These level ups play up more in the rest of the story, where he gets to save his points and use them later. Um, there are many things that we could change and add and take away, but I felt like this was a very effective way to show off that you don't need to have elaborate. He used Taekwondo's 30-second form, Rising Tiger, to swing around his body and arms to beat him in the face and was blocked. You don't need that to write a fight scene. You can use the bare minimum. The more important part is that your fight scene should play a part in the story, and should have some catharsis. It should have some relatability and should be based on the real world. Should a kid be able to kill full-grown adults? No. More often than not, children do not have the strength to overpower full-grown adults. But under the right circumstances, repeated blows to the head do mean lights out forever. Sorry, I'm trying to use language that's not going to get me like marked, demonetized, or whatever. Um, but uh, in the right circumstances, like if you fall hard enough on your head, that's lights out. If you get struck enough in the head, that's lights out. And so we use this way to use the environment and skills, like the way he snuck up on the first gardener. He had a sneak skill. We emphasized that would get him a critical hit chance, and when he did it, he obviously um, was able to get a lucky shot in, and then was able to do lights out for Gardner for forever. Looted the body, moved on. We've shown that the brick is effective and that it can be used, so we don't have to say I hit him with the brick, I hit him with the brick, I hit him with the brick. We can say other things to get the fight scene across. And ultimately, um, maybe it felt longer on here, maybe it felt shorter because I was reading it or the way the pages were formatted. But it doesn't take very long to make a fight scene impactful. We saw how it changed the characters, how people were um, maybe completely ignorant of his existence beforehand, and how that changed. Um, Pixie says repetition is good when showing off one-sided fights. One of my favorites is the 2 pages of just one word splat in Overlord books. It's a slaughter of the giant spider of giant sheeps over the army, and it's amazing. Yeah, um, and that's why you should experiment with fights. Sometimes you can get away with doing critical hit, critical hit, critical hit. And other times you, I threw it, and instead of getting a hair shot, I managed to take out his leg. It sheared off, which is the force of the brick. Like two very different um, fights, but this is kind of where the scene climaxed was with this one. I wouldn't consider this the fight any part of the fight scene where the guards start punching him and stuff, but maybe an effect of how he can overpower some people, but obviously not professionals, showing the limitations of the character himself. The actions taken, showing more of the world and why he's in such circumstances, showing the unrelenting um, position of his father. We keep alluding that he's a cursed child, and it really comes into play that this is part of the curse, and him being able to shear off somebody's face completely, getting all these skills from a second form activated after he takes damage, like are all ways to reveal this curse in a very impactful way. So this isn't just a fight scene. This is unveiling plot parts of the story. The fact that he gets more abilities from taking damage and taking half health and things like that. The fact that one kick brought him to half health is also important to note that he is not strong, and like one wrong move will, be lights out for him, which raises the stakes as well. So even though he's overpowering the enemies, we also see that he's not one-sidedly all-powerful. We see that he has disadvantages, and that those disadvantages make the fight more compelling and raise the stakes. The fact that he can beat these feels more like luck and calculation as opposed to just, oh, I'm so strong and I can kill everyone. Which I feel makes more compelling fights, especially when you have weaker characters going against stronger characters. Um, so yeah, so the fight scene should be part of the story. Think about when you're including a fight scene. If you need to check off like a certain number of fights just because they're events in the story, think about before and after the fight. Consider how to tell the fight versus how to show the fight. Experiment with how the fight can be shown. So you don't always need to be he punched him. It could be context clues like how we set up with this story. Setting up a different dynamic for how fights are to be presented. Um, and at the end of the day, it still boiled down to. Oh, we read a lot. Yeah. The carriage was being attacked at one point. There was inner debate on how to act. At some point, a pretty girl was revealed and in danger. He overpowered mob enemies. There was a more dynamic fight with a boss enemy. And then there was victory over foe and the damsel's gratitude. Like, those were all in here. But it didn't feel as formulaic because it felt like it was in a story, and maybe um, You don't have to write to the formula, but write to what is good. Write to how you feel, and just include these elements as you feel you need it. You can have entire fight scenes where it's all inner monologue with a few actions, where everything is set up. Uh, or maybe it's all build up and exposition, and the direct action is, and the inner monologue is minimal. Or no, the direct action is minimal, and the inner monologue is the more impactful thing. Um, there's an anime, there's a Magic Knight anime school about knights like chivalry. Uh, and this one character, he uses his he's not strong like the other knights, but he has a ability where he can push out all of his physical potential into a few moments, but then it exhausts him, like a price for power kind of move. And the very last fight, the very thing that everything's building up to, in the last battle in episode 12, it's a first strike battle where the person who hits the hardest, the best, the fastest is the one who wins. And it is one of the most gratifying fight scenes in all of anime that I've ever seen. The animation is spectacular. It gets all black and white and red and yellow and their signature colors. He pushes out all of his, instead of doing it for a few moments or a few seconds, he pushes out all his power for like 1 second for one attack. Meanwhile, his enemy, she specializes in, I believe it's called EI, or um, is the art of sword drawing. Yeah, I know what anime you're talking about. Saw the scene, not the anime. Yeah, so all like the scene is really good on itself, but when you like the build up to that scene is very impactful. It's like him in prison and being interrogated, and behind the scenes stuff trying to get him to break him down mentally and emotionally. And it all kind of culminates in the scene, and he wins, and it's all great. But like, it's so much more impactful when you have everything around it. Like the fight scene is satisfying, but it gets to even be more satisfying when you think about the beginning, the before, and the after. Um, so yeah, so think about before and after the fight. Um, and sometimes one fight scene, sometimes lots of little fight scenes. Like you don't need to be. Uh, let's see. I'd also nominate the fight between Coquatus and Brian and Overlord. This is one strike battle between a warrior who has trained his body for decades, performing one perfect strike. Someone who has grown so much over the story against a mountain. Yeah, exactly. The single strike, soul and earth, poured into attack that doesn't scratch the mountain, yet demands respect from it. Yeah, exactly. Like, you. And the fact is, like, every fight scene, your main characters don't have to win. And I would argue that losing is an effective tool to exploit that's not exploited enough. For your main characters to lose and lose, maybe not elegantly, but effectively for the story, for character development. Um, Tournament arcs are so tropey and um, so done to death because it's very literally a fight, many fight scenes back to back with very low stakes, and where the main character may is probably going to win everything, right? If the MC is quote unquote strong enough and overpowered enough and more MC enough, they just beat the whole thing, and so they're very hard to execute. But sometimes they feel like necessary plot devices to some authors. They're very, but I would argue away from doing tournament arcs. Nah, Pokemon tournament arcs. Yeah, I would say Pokemon tournament arcs would be where you want to look, um, where there's intense battle and stakes. But um, I would advise new writers to stay away from tournament arcs, especially early in their writing, and practice, unless they want to use a tournament arc to practice um, trial and error stages of how to fight within the realm of their story itself. Anyways, homework. Um, as always, write. These classes are for you guys to help you. So write, and then write more, because writing is a skill, and you only get better as you go. It's a muscle you have to exercise. Every day you'll be better than the last. You just got to keep at it. Going forward, now that we've talked about fight scenes, if you want to write effective fight scenes, go out and read fight scenes and read them effectively. Learn not only just the scene itself, but everything that leads up to that scene and everything that happens after that scene. And start hyper analyzing and breaking down and critical thinking about it, because then you'll be able to take those lessons you've learned and apply them to your own writing, especially the scenes you like. You should probably want to include the things you like in the writings you write. And also get some notebooks. They can be on your phone too, for notes, taking screenshots, pictures. You don't have to have like a dedicated notebook by you every time you read a book, but I would advise keeping a notebook by you just in general, because you never know when ideas are going to strike. You never know when they're going to leave your head. So that is it. I have talked for 2 hours. I need to nap. I need to shower. I need to do other things. But we have made it. So this will be the question and answer phase of our story. Leisha says, I just want to say I really appreciate you, Captain, putting so much effort into these events. I love your community. Thank you. I really want to create a community where people are empowered to see the possibilities in the world. In the world where there's so much negativity, there's honestly so many opportunities still left to be grabbed. So many side hustles. You don't need to make your passion a side hustle, but if you need a side hustle, your passion is a good place to start, and there are markets for that. Do you mind if I try to set up a writing event for fight scenes on Discord? I might have an idea on how to do it. I welcome it. Anything we can do to get people writing and practicing and doing more writing, that'd be awesome. Especially people that have a desire to write and just have never been told that you can do it. I'm here to tell you, you can do it. Like, at no point do you have to be perfect. I'll get the details for you on the council. Perfect. You should be able to do the things that you want to do. So, in many cases, it's just the ADHD telling you you're not good enough, or some mental part of your brain telling you you're not good enough, or some past trauma telling you you're not good enough. I'm here to tell you that you are good enough. It's not. Sometimes it's just the synapse in your brain confusing you. You can do anything you set your heart to, and if you want to write, just do it. It's there. You can get a pencil and paper. If you have a computer and a Google account, Google Docs is amazing for just having a cloud thing on the go. If you have Microsoft Word, even if you just get on notepads, if you have a whiteboard, like, you can write anywhere. And I've all sorts of writing all over my house and all sorts of places. But yeah, I'm here to tell you you can do it, and I'm here to give you the skills and resources and tools to do so. For fight scenes, how should you incorporate magic? Should you include the incantations? I would say that if you have many fight scenes with magic, many of them, and plotted many of them, that your first fight scene, like, I don't know if it's kind of normal to have a long ass incantation in the middle of a fight. I would set up either before the fight scene or in the first fight scene, the incantation, how long it lasts, how long it takes to count, whether it's how long it takes to chant the incantation or what it is, should be set up in the first one, and then later on you can say things like, and then I started the incantation, and I made it halfway through the incantation before he struck me, and things like that. You shouldn't include every incantation, um, but that could be inner monologues, that could be things. Not every magic needs incantations, and not every incantation, if you are going to include them, needs to be written down every time. So, let's see here. If we look at Sebas, his first spell ever has a technical incantation where he shouts like, "In the name of Gaia, blast away my enemies," or something like that. The power of Christ compels you. And he shoots wind from his hand. And later, as the story progresses, we learn about his magic, that he can use it more naturally. He doesn't need to use an incantation every time. Sometimes he says things like wind walk or wind step or whatever. Sometimes he labels it, but in fights, like the fight against Rollo, he jumps around and is able to, in the fight scene itself, it's not bogged down with an incantation because we've set up beforehand that Sebas can use magic in this way, where he like flings his arm in an arc and a wind blade comes out of it, or wind circlet comes out of it. And so we can progress the fight scene instead of saying, and then I summoned wind magic from my hand and threw a wind blade at it after saying a spell, and then I summoned wind magic again and did the thing. No. We set up a precedence, and then we execute the precedence with telling about it. In my current situation right now, is the magic casting device have computing processing, initiates magic circles with simple voice commands like computer programs, but that's only usable in more futuristic magic settings. Yeah, so my advice, if you're including magic, is to set up the precedents and a formula and do something showy and how it has to be showy and magical, and set up how magical and awesome it is and be very descriptive of it, and then later on you can shorthand it. Because we've already seen how magical and awesome it is, we don't need a recap on every magical and awesome thing every single time. And I would argue that also goes for sword fighting. If you're doing sword fighting, if you're gonna break down sword forms and logistics and swords, start with some precedent setting. I set my foot forward and I swung downward, and it's called Falling Dragon. And a huge blast of sword aura magic lightning came out of it, then you can just later say, and I did slashing dragon and he blocked it. How did he block slashing dragon? And we kind of always, and we have a precedence for that. I see. Thanks for the advice. Awesome. Hopefully I haven't beaten that stick with a dead horse. Any other questions? I'll give you guys a few seconds to write while I take a drink. I'm back for my drink. If we have no more questions, can we get some no's in chat? I'm good. Thank you for being awesome. You're so handsome, Captain. I wish I was you. I wish I was talented and amazing. Or just no's. No more questions from Leashes. Thanks. Awesome. Yeah. No problem. My pleasure. I'm good. Danke. Perfect. All right. Well, since you're the only two in chat that have been pretty active and we have had enough time for anyone else to post, I'm going to say we are good and golden. Um, if you have more questions about fight scenes and more specific examples and things, join the Discord. Uh, in my Twitch profile, there's a link to my Patreon, and on my Patreon profile, that's free to view for anyone, don't have to subscribe, there is a Discord link, and you can go to that and join my Discord. It's super easy to find. It's free to join my Discord. You don't have to join my Patreon to join Discord. If you can't, for some reason, find my Patreon, message me over Twitch, and I'll send you the information. As always, my books and stories are on Wattpad. I post first on Patreon, so everything is like a day or a week or whatever, a chapter early on Patreon for those that subscribe, and then on Wattpad for free. And then if you want to support me, go to Tapas and support me by unlocking chapters for Foxtails on Tapas. Right now, I am working on True Love 7th Kiss. I am finalizing a story about a druid to try to get it posted, and I'm dabbling around with this one. This story, The Villainous Happy Ending, I've been dabbling around with a while. This is actually the third time I've started it, so who knows if we're ever going to get to posting it, but this was a scene from it. Maybe if we get some more attention on it, we'll go through it, but I do have some new ideas that I got last night for it. We'll see if we get any farther with it. But I do have at least 3 completed stories. They are on Wattpad. Oh, Leisha says she has a question. They have a question. Perfect. This is open dialogue. Even if it's off topic. I'll plug some more. The story that I have 3 main works. The first is Tales of the Pearly City. It's about a guy who gets reborn in a his video game, but it's 250 years after the events. There's Foxtails, as we've gone over. It's about a boy who gets reincarnated as a fox boy in a magical world. And then True Love 7th Kiss, where it's a boy who gets reincarnated in another world and essentially has to play the bachelor with 7 villainesses who have to kiss him and get True Love's first kiss, and he is being helped by a trickster god. What are your thoughts on reviewing your fans' works on stream? I feel like it would help improve while also giving them some exposure on their works. That is not a bad idea. My only problem with that is I would have certain requirements, and those requirements would obviously be, if you know anything about me in the past, and any of my stories, it has to be longer than 1 page, longer than 1 chapter. You have to commit to me that you're going to keep writing it after I give feedback. And we'll go from there. But those would be my 2 big commitments, is there has to be more than 1 chapter, and you have to commit to me that there'll be more. If I'm going to give you my time, you have to put time back into your work. You can't just stop writing. So we can definitely talk about that more on the Discord. We can do specific instances, but I wouldn't have too much trouble going over to work. We'd have to talk about if I'm gonna read it on stream or just review it on stream. But I don't have a problem with. I have no problem with criticizing other people's stories. My biggest caveat is I don't want to put effort into something and then get nothing in return, and the only thing I really want in return is that you don't feel butthurt over my criticisms, and that you understand that I'm genuinely trying to help, and that I'm giving you advice to help you write further, and that by doing all these things, my expectation of you is to keep writing. It's not to scare you off. No. It's the exact opposite. I want you to double down. Yes, definitely. Yeah. So, I definitely want to do a creative writing 101 stream, and then I want to do resource streams, but I think review streams would be good. We could do some review streams. Maybe I'll get some more attention that way. Uh, but we will see. Definitely, I want to encourage independent writers. So if that encourages independent writers, then I see no reason not to do it. Uh, so yeah, so I stream game streams on Sunday nights at 2 a.m. I stream uh, author author related streams on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. All this is Mountain Standard Time. I have my books on Wattpad. If please support me on Patreon and Nathaniel Wilhelm on Patreon. It helps me keep doing this. It helps me pay my bills. It helps me not have a second job so that I can do this. So as always, thank you for showing up. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your interest in writing. I think you guys can do it. And may the winds of fortune ever fill your sails. Until next time.